top issues, and that's what we're focused on. When it comes to gun safety, I tell you this. I'm willing to have any conversation with them about gun safety if they're serious. If they're serious about changing our environment, because guns are only a small and inanimate part of that problem. Are we going to talk about families? Are we going to talk about mental health? Are we going to talk about substance abuse? Are we going to talk about social, emotional well-being of our students? Are we going to do all the things that contribute to violence, whether it's gun violence or not? If we're going to have a serious, grown-up conversation about that, I'm all in. Well, what I hear from the governor is just, just political speak for, let's make everything about gun violence, because that's good for us politically and bad for our opponents politically, and that's not a serious conversation about changing people. He's talking about changing things. Changing things is easy. Changing people is hard. And if they're wanting to change our environment, our communities, our state, I'm all in, but that's not what they're talking about right now.
I guess I would say the one part of his speech that I really reacted negatively to is when he said that he'll do anything to keep people more safe. And you reflect on the public safety bills that I already mentioned that clearly made people less safe, and the fact that there's been rollbacks of penalties having to do with gun violence. They're not talking about doing everything to keep people safe. They're talking about the things that are most divisive.
I'm wondering if you could speak about the Blake decision and the path forward and what the conversations are in your caucuses there in terms of, so the framework there and where you might see common ground with the Democrats.
Yeah, I think the path forward, it's going to be a little tricky, frankly, and I can speak specifically to the Senate, where the chair of Law and Justice has a decidedly different view, certainly than our caucus, and with much of her caucus, and that she wants to pursue a decriminalization path. That's not the path that most people in the state of Washington support. It's not a path that most of the members of the legislature support. I think it's much more likely to be something along the lines of what was originally passed out of the Senate on a very bipartisan basis. In 2021, that was a proposal put forward and then negotiated with the majority, where we passed it on a bipartisan basis. And it looks something like we do step back from the felony issue, that while there's some value in drug court, I don't want to dismiss that. The idea that there's ultimately more harm than good, but we can't just make it no cost. We have to involve the justice or the criminal justice system at some level, because they are going to be involved. No matter what you do, they are the ones out there on the streets. They're the ones that are going to interact with folks who are addicted to these substances. So we have to involve them, and we have to look for ways we can get folks into treatment. I think there's a lot of agreement broadly that we're not here about reinventing the war on drugs. We're trying to get people into treatment and keep them in treatment, but also a growing recognition we can't do that outside the criminal justice system. So it's going to be a framework that says, hey, there are penalties. I think right now, if I was guessing, I'd say the landing point is a gross misdemeanor, but there's some series of deferrals or required treatment, and it ratchets up over time. So we say you've got to get into treatment, and if you get into treatment and you're successful, great, that's super, that's what we're all trying to get to. If you're not in treatment, that ratchets up over time, so we have a bigger lever to keep people in treatment. I'd like to think that's where we're going. That's what I'm hearing from my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, but we got a lot of work to do.
We have quite a few policies, some that are just separate and bipartisan. Look to protecting children, mostly. The decriminalization of drugs really ended up throwing it out there, and really concerns about the next generation that are receiving from their schools, their elementary schools, and their parks. And so making sure we protect children, especially on those really hard drugs right away. There's some policies that are going to be coming forward that is bipartisan on that issue. And then also we do have a bill that just directly looks at the gross misdemeanor of really going back and looking at the criminalization of some of these most difficult drugs to get hooked on and suffer from. And this is really, as we see every day, we're seeing mothers and fathers and children lost to these drugs. And so really this was not the most main thing. Protect people who needed help and wanted help. And so now we need to look at, with the decriminalizations of these drugs, how do we look at helping the people that are suffering from it? And have a bipartisan effort to make sure that happens. And that is something that Republicans were fighting for when this first started. How do we help the people that are suffering on these drugs?
So just to, I guess, clarify and go off of what you just said, it sounds like you guys are open to keeping it a misdemeanor. You're not just strictly going toward the felony.
Gross.
Well, and so I learned a lot as a former law enforcement officer. I've been learning a lot through this process. When it is a felony, you have standardized sentencing guidelines, and when you make it a gross misdemeanor, you have a little more leeway in the judicial branch of the government to see how to assist people in that way. And we're willing to work together and say, okay, how do we work through this process? I know there is policy that is felony, and I know there is policy coming that is gross misdemeanor. I'm a sponsor. Make sure that everybody has the options available in the judicial branch to help everyone at this point who is suffering.
I think what you're going to see is a lot of cooperation on this. If it fails again, it'll become very political, I suppose. But I think the truth is, Republicans and Democrats want to get this right, and we're trying hard to find a place where you can get majorities to do it. And what I would hope, honestly, is if it's hard to get 50 Democrats on a single policy that is effective, that they will give up their idea that you have to have 50 Democratic votes to bring anything to the floor, and find a way to bring a bill to the floor that might be a felony or a gross misdemeanor that could get 70 votes, but it would be a lot of Republican votes that would be part of getting that. This is a place where there's just too much humanity involved to let it be political. And I'm pretty sure that almost everybody is feeling exactly that way about it.
We've got time for one more question.
Representative Braun talked about investing in education, early learning, and child care to expand, I guess, opportunities for working families looking for child care. Do either of your caucuses have specific proposals along those lines?
I'd say the most powerful proposal on child care right now is for the state to step back from, we waded in fairness, in a bipartisan way on early education over the last 10 years in ways that have not necessarily been helpful for the access and affordability of child care. The best proposal, I think, out there is a simple one that increases the rate. Because what that does is that it doesn't change the standards, it doesn't complicate the cost to access to workforce, access to facilities, and by changing the state paid rate, that means it not only helps the people who are using the state services, it also averages down the cost for the private side who are making up the difference. This is the single best way. It's a very simple solution, elegant solution that actually gets at solving the problem without making it worse. And that's what we got to do. Is we have the humility to say, look, we did this, I think, for the right reasons. We want high quality child care for our children, but by putting standards in there that drove the cost up, that made workforce unavailable, that literally closed down child care centers across our state. I used to tell people I drove by 5 closed child care centers between my house and my normal job every day for several years. Some of them have now been turned into other things, but they're all still there. We drove them out of business because we made the standards unachievable and unaffordable, and what we can do more than anything else is for the state to pay its fair share and get out of the way of private side child care providers doing their job.
Thank you very much, everybody. It was great seeing you. Come back again soon.
At some point you're going to be tired of it.
See, I know that's going to happen, but